This video is going to provide you the information for keeping your STIHL FS280 or any two-stroke gasoline power engine performing at its best for a lifetime. The first thing that you need to know is, as the engine endures over time period for a year or two, experience and problem with the muffler exhaust system is most likely. If the exhaust system or muffler is to become overheated, it will cause that plastic cover to melt, deform, or most likely caught on fire. In this video, we're going to discuss issues that could cause the exhaust system and the muffler to overheat, pertaining to causing a fire and loss of performance and operation of the two-stroke engine. The exhaust system on all two-stroke gasoline engine must be maintained the same way as the air filter and the intake system. In a previous video that is in the video description link, we show you how to quickly start the engine when it is cold and how to clean, maintain the STIHL FS280 trimmer, also known as a brush cutter, weed eater, and a gas power tool. This video is also going to show you solution that should be taken into consideration and done to the machine to prevent future problems and issues that may arise. In this video, we are going to be discussing the long-term disadvantage of the exhaust manifold muffler in relation to engine performance. On the side of the muffler, you're going to see 4 torque screws that is required for removing the muffler in the event it should need replacing or replacement of its gasket joint. Once the exhaust manifold is removed from the engine, you are going to notice a baffle or spark arrestor inside of the muffler. Once the muffler has been removed from the engine, you're going to notice damage to its gasket like you see here, and on the exhaust port at the top you will notice a piece of gasket stuck to it. You can purchase a new gasket from the STIHL manufacturer, or you could duplicate gasket by using aluminum foil in layers, placing it on the old gasket, eliminating that cardboard from the gasket. The cardboard is what's going to burn and cause the exhaust to leak. So when we look inside of the muffler, you will see that chamber that is enclosed inside the muffler, and it has little holes on it for retaining oil and baffling the exhaust gas, also suppressing spark if it should occur. Our topic is going to be on that baffle inside of the muffler and how to reduce its effect by moving it into a different location. As you can see in this modification, the baffle was moved up into the exhaust manifold, up into this area, by placing the tool or screwdriver through the exhaust port and pushing it up. What's important is the edge of the baffle that you see leading here must go above where the gasket will be compressed. Let's take another look, very close look at the fitting of the baffle new position. So you can see the baffle is completely above the exhaust port, eliminating its function from trapping oil and those little holes from becoming clogged, restricting exhaust flow during long-term operation. In the process of relocating that spark arrestor or baffle, you're going to find this part inside the muffler. Well, that part can be passed out from this port for removal because you don't want to leave it inside the muffler, since it will most likely become a rattle object when the engine is operating. Relocation of that baffle to the top of the muffler, you're going to notice when you're in the process of doing so that the baffle also have some side ferrules for the bolt to pass through and allow the muffler to torque properly to the cylinder or the engine. With the baffle relocated to the top of the muffler, you're not going to be able to torque those bolts as tight as they were when the baffle were in location from factory. So you're going to need to use some form of exhaust or high temperature silicone where the gasket is going to be placed if you do not use the aluminum foil layer method. Whatever you do, you are going to experience problems with this muffler once you start operating the engine, because that baffle is going to become restrictive with oil and carbon, causing a back pressure to burn the gasket and cause a exhaust leak. That is the reason we are moving the baffle out of location, to allow the exhaust gas to freely flow out of the muffler and preventing excessive back pressure for burning that gasket. It's also beneficial to engine performance in long-term use. When we take a look at the exhaust port, you can see the difference. That piece of gasket that was stuck to the upper part has been removed, and that is what was causing a leak in the exhaust. Using a metal tube for placing to sleeve the bolt inside of the muffler might be necessary if you choose to clamp the bolts and the muffler to the cylinder head like factory recommended. That tube must be cut exactly as the section that is non-threaded and placed into the muffler while the bolts are being passed through for fitting. The most important part of this modification is we want to install these two sockets. These are two 8mm sockets inside where you see the outer hole and this hole right here. We want to get it in here so it acts as a column. When the bolt is to be placed through it, we'll be able to apply as much torque as possible for the muffler against the engine, squeezing the gaskets. These are the gasket that was made up here with aluminum foil. We found these to be much better. They don't burn out like the factory gasket. So that is the goal. So when we take a look at the sockets, you could see approximately 2 to 3 millimeter was grind down from these two sockets here, which is going to be installed into the muffler compared to the factory length socket. So fitting those two bolts and that socket in the muffler is not going to be an easy task. One thing I want you to do, or you should do, is you see how they have a small hole and a big hole? Well, that big hole should be enlarged with a drill to allow the muffler to breathe a lot better. And see, that's the bolt all the way through, no damage to the muffler. This is not going to be an easy task to do. So when we take a look at here, you could see the two sockets and the baffle is still in position. The baffle is still at the top. That you're not going to be able to get out unless you separate the muffler into two halves. But when we look in there, you see that's one socket on the side bracing the outer half and the inner half of the muffler, and there is another one doing the same thing. Now this muffler could be perfectly torqued to the engine without deforming the surface when it gets hot, because that is what's most likely going to happen when you tighten down the bolt. As the engine and the muffler get hot, it's going to create an uneven surface between the cylinder, the engine port, and the muffler port, and it's going to most likely blow out the gasket, causing it to burn. So by placing those two sockets in there is what's going to give the bolt a tight torque against the engine for holding that gasket in position. Now this is something I'm able to do in my home. So if you were to take this to a machine shop, they should be able to do a much better job than I did. But I'm going to let you know this is not easy to do, especially when that piece falls out. To get it out, it might be a little easier than trying to move that baffle, see, to the top, that's up here, and trying to get that two sockets in there is going to be another challenge. So now we can install this muffler and don't have to worry about any leaks between the engine and the muffler gasket. In overall endurance, this machine has not endured for over 50 hours of operation, and you can see the carbon and residue that has built up inside the muffler. And when we take a look at the exhaust port, you could see a difference by using the razor blade for cleaning the carbon away from the port walls. This is the carbon that's going to develop onto the piston ring. Now, removing the spark plug, you're going to be able to move the piston up and down much easier. So there you could see the ring. That carbon that will develop in the port will lodge into the piston ring, causing it to stuck, and this will cause a loss of compression on the engine. The carbon buildup on the exhaust side is very critical that it's kept clean, and make sure that the muffler is free flowing. Now that the baffle spark arrestor has been moved up into the muffler, all that oil that will normally be dumped on the spark arrestor and the exhaust port will become at the bottom of the muffler and remain in that area for later on to be cleaned out if you choose to clean the muffler or replace it. It will no longer be damaging inside the spark arrestor, also known as the baffle, or develop inside the exhaust port for damaging the piston ring and causing the engine to lose power. So when we take a look at the spark plug, you can see that's the color of the spark plug we want to have, and the gap on the spark plug should be approximately 0.020 in the event you should need to check the gap when replacing it. Replacing the spark plug should be done at every 100 hours of operation. This piece from inside the muffler will not be used again and will remain outside. When the bolts are to be tightened with the engine, the muffler itself will clamp down on the spark arrestor, keeping it in place, preventing it from rattling. Take notice to the gasket for the muffler that's going to be mated to the engine side. The paper has been removed from the aluminum section of the gasket. This is going to allow the aluminum side of the gasket to mate against the aluminum engine, preventing the gasket from burning. Since the paper has been stuck to the muffler and is completely removed to the other side of the gasket, we're going to keep the paper in location and use a high temperature exhaust silicone, lightly coating it for properly sealing the gasket joint against the muffler and the engine. Let's take a look at the muffler installation. So you can see that shiny sockets in there, and the hole has been enlarged for easy exhaust of the engine. Let's get a close look at the gasket. We can see that gasket is perfectly sealed against the engine. With the spark arrestor, the baffle, located up in this area now, you're still going to be able to get a sufficient amount of torque on the bolt for tightening the muffler, since the bottom edge of the spark arrestor is at the leading edge of the upper port of the muffler and the cylinder head. So there should be no concern of lacking torquing the bolts for sufficiently sealing the muffler against the gasket and the engine. With the modification complete, what are the benefits? Well, the benefits are you're going to be able to maintain maximum horsepower when operating the machine, or maybe a little more horsepower, since the engine is able to exhaust itself much better than it was before. Another benefit of the machine is that, pertaining to emissions, all the contaminants and pollutants that will be lodged or caught up on that baffle spark arrestor will now settle itself at the bottom of the muffler and remain in that area for a slow burn when the engine is in operation. Another important part in maintaining the engine is taking a look at this crankshaft positive ventilation vent. That will be called a PCV ventilation. So you're going to want to disconnect this hose every often and make sure you could blow through it or suck through it. Same thing for the other end. If that passageway is to become clogged, you will have an excessive buildup of crankcase pressure, and this could also affect performance for the engine. So those are a few things you're going to want to check every time you're maybe fueling up or changing the spark plug. Another benefit towards the engine is that it will be able to operate much cooler since there is less restriction in the exhaust system. Also, less likely to have a backfire. If a backfire should occur, you will simply change that spark plug, because that will most likely be the cause of it. As always, it will be best to keep the cover, that plastic, when it is in operation, since the tail of the machine, that will be this end, will be swinging from a left to right position, promoting air cool and flow for better performance. These two-stroke gas engine may be similar to hobby engine, which uses a nitromethane propellant fuel for powering it. Since this engine used gasoline and petroleum oil for powering it and lubrication, it is not the same as a nitromethane engine, since a nitromethane engine does not deposit any carbon, sludge inside its muffler and engine port. So it is very important that these two-cycle gasoline with lubricating oil engine is maintained on the exhaust side, just like maintaining a clean air filter on the intake side. Both sides of the engine must have the same breathing or air passage efficiency. If one side becomes clogged, the engine will lose power and performance. Does not matter if it's the